All right, I get to finally meet Dr. David Brownstein in person here at the Wise Traditions Conference, and you just gave an hour, 15-ish minute long talk on salting your way to health. And the first thing that really caught my attention was the case studies that you presented of people who had all kinds of different problems that maybe any other doctor would not associate with salt. What is it in your brain that you put those two together and think, hey, someone with food allergies or someone who's just not feeling up to snuff may just need more salt?
You know, I didn't start off this way. And when I started doing holistic medicine, I started looking at hormones, and hormones led to looking at nutrition. And then I started balancing hormones and balancing nutrition, and salt was just a natural role of that. So once I started putting people on salt and realizing the difference between unrefined natural salt and refined toxic salts that are out there, I realized the importance. I researched the physiology and biochemistry of salt and realized how important it was for the body. Salt's the second major constituent next to water. We need adequate amounts of salt or we won't live. Life's incompatible without salt. Mm-hmm. Every human culture in existence of mankind survived if they found salt. There was no civilization that didn't exist without having a source of readily available source of salt.
There are many controversial topics out there related to medicine on the internet. I know this because I've been suspended for several of them. But you know what I have never actually been suspended for is talking about salt. However, it seems like salt has such a bad name, even though there may not be a YouTube guideline against talking about it. Why? Why do we get such bad information about the benefits of salt?
When I started to write my book on salt, I always researched where did this information come from? Salt was so bad for you, because I was seeing in my practice people need salt and they did better when they got their salt levels up. So just as I've done with iodine and some other things, I went back in time and there was this intersalt study of around 1970 or so. And it was a worldwide study where they looked at salt intake over 24 centers across the world, and how much salt people were taking in, and their blood pressure. And what the study reported was low salt results in lower blood pressure. And therefore, from this national study or worldwide study, and therefore we need to lower our salt intake because we have a blood pressure epidemic in our country. So the Surgeon General went on all the TV shows and was in Life magazine and said we need to lower our salt. The government, I can't remember who was president at the time, came out and said this is a national emergency.
Heard that before.
Yes, we need to lower our salt levels. Uh-huh. Well, and this is cited many times, and so when I looked at the intersalt study, I was stunned. I don't remember how many groups there were exactly. It's not in front of me right now, but there were, out of all the world places they looked at salt intake and blood pressure, there was no correlation. Some had high salt intake and lower blood pressure, and some had low salt intake and high blood pressure, and vice versa. But there were two groups of people found lower salt intake and lower blood pressure. And that's what they seized on as the smoking gun, salt causes hypertension. Well, those two groups were non-acculturated populations. One was, I studied them at University of Michigan back in the day. I can't think of their names. A tribe.
National champs.
Yes, national champs, of course. A tribe in Brazil. The other one was a tribe somewhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. That they lived in the jungle and they didn't get a lot of salt in their diet. They had low salt levels, and they didn't have high blood pressure. However, the people in these groups didn't live to old age. Their average age of dying was in the low 50s. They were living in the jungle. So they didn't get high blood pressures, they got older because they didn't get older. But that's where these recommendations started, and then it just took off from there. And then Big Pharma had all the reasons in the world to continue these low salt recommendations, because low salt recommendations, as I mentioned in my talk, cause the kidneys to release all these hormones to raise salt levels, such as renin, aldosterone, angiotensin. And we have drugs to treat renin, aldosterone, angiotensin. These are the best-selling hypertensive drugs out there. So I believe we're in part causing this hypertensive epidemic from our wrong recommendations on salt.
Okay. All right, someone's watching this and they're like, I'm in, I want to up my salt intake. What are your recommendations for sourcing and dosing?
Number one, go work with a doctor who can check your levels and who is salt literate and understands these concepts. So, and you need to have blood work check. I don't recommend everyone willy-nilly just starting to salt everything. But salt's the second major constituent in the body next to water. You need adequate amounts of salt for for life. And it's during COVID, keeping people's salt levels up was one of the best things we did for them. One thing I found, people ended up in the hospital if they got dehydrated and low salt. They can't handle things, and their body will start to fall apart.
And you did mention in one of your answers that if you drink a lot of water, you're thinking you're hydrating, that you could be flushing too much salt out of your body, and so you need to replenish.
Absolutely. Those who drink a lot of water need more salt. You will deplete salt levels if you drink enough water.
Okay, last question. What is the most unexpected relationship you've seen between a case study you've had, a patient's issues, and low salt? Like, you just would say, most people would never have thought this was the connection, but we just upped the salt and symptoms got better.
Well, let me give you two things. Number one, it's patient after patient after patient with slightly elevated or elevated blood pressure. When I get them resituated, get their hormones balanced, and get their salt levels up, their blood pressure comes down and normalizes. So that's number one. Number two was that case history I gave in this talk of Sue, who was a hairstylist who became so sick, she couldn't eat any food. She was eating white rice and broccoli, or two foods, and that was it. And she was getting hives every time, couldn't take any vitamins, couldn't take anything. And she was miserable and really wanted to kill herself. And so I found that her pH was really low, and her salt levels were really low. The only thing I gave her was salt. I gave her a half a teaspoon of unrefined salt a day to start, based on that blood test. And her pH came up to 6.6 from below 6. And all of a sudden her food allergies started to settle down. She could eat more food, upped her salt, her pH came up to a more normal 7.0 to 7.2. All her food allergies resolved, she never had any more hives, and she became more of a normal type person with what she could take and what she couldn't take.
Books people can order of yours that address this?
There's two books, Salt Your Way to Health and Iodine, Why You Need It, Why You Can't Live Without It. And they're available on my website, drbrownstein.com.
Okay, everybody, check out the links for all the awesome products to support the channel. See you next time. Thanks, Dr. Brownstein.
Thank you.